Hi everyone, this is Miss Detterman, and I've been making a series of videos on how to calculate slope from a graph and then ultimately use that to create an equation for the graph, otherwise known as a mathematical model for the graph. Something that I've noticed a lot of students that run into an issue with is when they're calculating slope from a graph, they're doing it incorrectly. They've been taught in math class to do rise over run. And rise stands for the change in y over the change in x. So essentially, you choose 2 points along a graph and then just count the spaces as it goes up and count the spaces as it goes over. However, in physics, there's kind of a problem when students are doing this because we'll start to notice that in science classes, our scales are not like the ones that they are in math class. In math class, students are used to graphs going 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. However, science graphs don't do that. They've only seen graphs so far in math class that only go up by ones on both the x and the y. In science class, that's not the case. And a lot of times it's not the case, mainly because when you're graphing, sometimes you only have a small little area to make your graph in. So, say that this box right here is the only place you can fit a graph in, and it's maybe like 3 inches of your page on your lab report. And you have just a tiny little space to put your graph. And your data for, let's say, temperature goes from 0 degrees Celsius all the way to 100 degrees Celsius. On the graph, if it really were as big as it should be on your lab report, would probably be about this big. We don't have enough space to draw 100 lines. We just can't do it. It's not enough space. You can't draw that small. So typically what happens is if your temperature were the y, you do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and make every line go by 20s because that's all you had space for. And that's what happens in science class. And students aren't used to calculating slope on graphs where each line isn't one. They've only been taught it where lines are by ones. So this video is hopefully to show students how to calculate slope by using rise over run on a graph that doesn't have a scale that goes by ones. This also is true because students haven't seen where x and y don't match with their scale. Notice how this graph on the x-axis, every 4 lines goes up by 2. And on the y, every 2 lines goes by 20. They haven't seen this before, and it's really tricky to the students, and they get caught up and they get stuck because I keep telling them wrong. They would take slope and they would say, okay, we're right here. And then this is our next spot. And they would go up 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. They said their rise was 8. And then their run 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. That their run was 11. And they'd say 8 over 11. And then divide it, and they would say that their slope here, let me get my calculator up, was 0.73. But they're counting wrong. This is big wrong. Nope, don't do this. This is a hard no. Don't do it. Don't count by ones. Stop counting by ones. Look at your graph. First, figure out how much each line goes up by. So we know every 4 lines goes up by 2 on our x-axis. We can see that. We can count 1, 2, 3, 4. But how much does each line go up by? Well, let's find out. First, you're going to look at this first spot where you've got a labeled number. Our first labeled number is 2. I'm going to put a 2 right here. Then you are going to divide that 2 by the number line it ends up on. So we got 1, 2, 3, 4. It's on our fourth line. I'm going to do 2 divided by 4. That equals 0.5. Now I know every line goes up by 0.5. So I've just labeled a few of these little lines so it's easier to figure out. And now let's go ahead and do our x. Excuse my computer for being weird. We did our x, let's do our y. Sorry, I was distracted and said let's do our x when we actually need to move on and do our y. We know our first labeled number is 20, so we're going to do the same thing, 20. And this comes on the second line. I'll divide by 2. So each line goes by 10. So this first one's 10, 30, 50, 70, 90, 110. Just filling in what I know from looking at this. Then, now that I know what each line goes up by, when I'm doing my rise, don't count by ones, count by tens. So instead of saying that this rise would be 8, I would say 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, 70, 80. My rise is actually 80. Now I can do my run. And I said my run, we need to count by 0.5 because each line here is 0.5. So instead of counting by ones and saying this is 11, I'm going to count by 0.5. So 0.5, 1, 1.5, 2, 2.5, 3, 3.5, 4, 4.5, 5, 5.5. My run is actually 5.5. So now my last step is to take 80 and divide it by 5.5. This is going to equal 14.55.